All right. I see we've got Brent and Michael is here. Good to see you. And there's Sean. Yassine is he's having some technical issues, so I don't think he'll be able to join us. So it'll just be the four of us. But Michael, nice to see you again. And Brent, same here. And Sean, we never met, but great to have you on. So this session is all about build versus buy. Or hybrid, because there's combinations of the two that I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have all seen as well. So I think we'll kind of really want to get your opinions around this. And Michael, maybe we'll start with you. Like, can you give us some examples around, case studies or your experiences where, wherever you were, decided to build a custom solution, and like how'd that go compared to like buying something off the shelf? Kind of give me your thoughts around what you've seen in your past.
So from our just recent system and our experience time that we spent with Litmus, we went through Tirani. We, as a basically we're a food manufacturing company, we went through the efforts to develop a new OEE system for our facility. We went through many different interviewing and researching different packages out there. You have quite a few that were package systems that came with their own little widgets and their own systems and their own templates that were very cookie cutter. This is what you could do. We then looked at some other systems that were absolutely, you're building everything from the ground up, completely customizable. And in the end, we kind of went with an in-between supplier for it, which was Litmus. We utilized you guys as having the ability to provide us a quasi-custom application, because we didn't have to reinvent the wheel for all the user interfaces and graphics and things. So it was definitely that was kind of our mindset, was taking the advantage of some of the screens and the graphics and the use of, like, you use Grafana as your front end. That was very much it was you had a nice selection of features, but it was still customizable enough to meet our particular needs, because with every manufacturer or every end user who's going to put a system in like this, you all have your own custom requirements for what you want to implement in your system. So
yeah, so I agree. So there's always that level of uniqueness that you need to bring into the process or into whatever you're buying / building. So I'd agree 100%. Brent, what about your experience with this build versus buy or hybrid?
Yeah, I can boil this down in my mind, at least, and from our experience, we also have Litmus as an IoT device. It comes down to the integration. So we looked at the only thing we could actually consider that was already custom built, an application that was actually our test software, which was modular enough that we thought, operative word there, we could utilize that software to connect to the equipment, collect the data, integrate it into Grafana, as Mike indicated, and we could do all of that. Well, when you start peeling away the layers of the onion, as they say, you start considering, well, wait a minute, that test software, while it's good to connect in its own environment to connect to the test equipment, we don't have the capability to connect to Modbus. We have rudimentary functionality to connect to TCP/IP equipment. So we don't have the integration side, or rather the communication side, to connect to the equipment in the first place. Okay, let's say we had that. The next level is, how do we collect the data? Well, you'd have to write another module to that test software to actually understand how to talk to a PLC and collect the information from the tags. That has to be built in. Who's going to do this? Well, as I mentioned at the tail end of the other conversation we had earlier today, we have a digital factory funnel of about 34 different projects we want to try and tackle. The bottom line is, and to be brief, we don't have the resources to integrate all of those factors into the test software. So what do? Our plant manager is coming to us saying, I want to connect everything, connect it all, make it all connected. I want all the data. I don't care where it comes from, connect it and then collect it, if I can coin a phrase.
Right.
And we're saying we don't have the resources. That individual that knows the test software is one person. Now we're training a second person. I know the test software, but I'm off on other tasks. We don't have the people to do it. So that's another factor, right? It's the integration of all the tools, collecting the data, processing it, and displaying it in the case of Grafana. I go back to our temperature and humidity project, and Dave hit on this perfectly in the interim session there, where he mentioned about how quickly you can get to, and you mentioned it, Mark, the quick win. How can you get to that quick win? Well, we have in the Litmus device, we have that quick win. It was able to connect to the Modbus protocol. It was immediately out of the box able to connect to the sensors that we purchased, and it was immediately able to process that data and send it to the repository we needed. The other integration factor that I think, as simple as it sounds and was key, is the Grafana instance built into Litmus is immediately able to connect to the real-time database also within the Litmus device. We would have had to build all that from scratch. We don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what you're saying really is the integration piece is the plumbing bits, right? Where the less interesting but vital pieces to the solution is kind of what you want to look to buy or at least package up, so you don't have to spend the time doing it, but then you still want some level of customization on top of that, because as Michael also alluded to, that's the uniqueness of your process, or what your knowledge brings into the configurations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very good, very good. Sean, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah. So I will say that I'm coming at this from the vendor side as well, Mark. So Tulip is a platform, and we are a Litmus partner. So I don't have the same type of experience as Brent or Michael here, but Brent, what you were just talking about resonates a ton, because I think we talk to customers and manufacturers all the time who are, maybe they're gung-ho about building their own solution, which you'd expect, because manufacturers are builders, they're doers, they're closest to their problems, they know what they need. But then when you start actually kind of talking about, all right, well, what goes into this? It quickly becomes much more complex than you might think up front. I mean, honestly, building a software system of any kind is a whole other job. And a lot of manufacturers might not even have the people on staff to do that in the first place. And then if they do, then you're running into these types of issues of integrations, connectivity. Even if you can get it to the one use case that you're looking at, how does that integrate more with like the broader ecosystem that you've got, and to say nothing of other facilities and whatnot. So we also kind of approach this from like, there's a middle path here. It's not just about building from scratch from the ground up, and it's also not about just buying some like monolithic thing off the shelf that you have absolutely no control over. And it depends a bit on your willingness to sort of roll your sleeves up to be how much of that customization you're going to get. But there are platforms out there that will let you, comes with sort of the built-in stuff that you need in terms of frameworks, templates, connectors, maybe some hardware, but also sort of empowers you to take the lead on what the solutions are going to ultimately look like and how it's going to fit into your whole ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Very good points. I think you're right. There is no one size fits all. I think it really depends on what you're looking for as well, right? But so Michael, maybe let's talk a bit about key factors that should be considered when you're kind of assessing that trade-off between the control and customization you're getting from building. But when you buy, what are the factors you're looking for there, and how do you get the right balance between the two?
I think the biggest key factor that we wound up was cost versus timeline on how quickly you need a system put up. We were measuring, okay, how much money do we want to spend on the project to gain the data we want, versus how quickly we needed the development process. In our particular case, we were hoping to have a much quicker implementation schedule on the system. Unfortunately, our own internal resources, as this was a combined engineering and IT related project, whereas engineering, we were all ready to go and everything was good, but then having those additional resources with IT to support our internal IT infrastructure versus everything that we were doing on the OT network on the plant floor, we had that ready to go, but we were still waiting for the IT side of it. So I think those were the kind of the key factors that we were looking at. And unfortunately, not everybody was on the same page when we were trying to implement the system. So it was, a little bit frustrating, but I think that was mainly it. Was just, for our perspective, was just time and schedule and cost related to that. So
okay, very good. So from the alignment perspective, like not having everybody on the same page, how do you address that? Like what kind of tactics do you do to make sure your team's pulling in the right direction, or all in the same direction at least?
Well, I guess it depends upon the company and the people that are actually involved with it. In our particular case, we had to do quite a bit of additional alignment between our departments to try to get everybody on the same page and focus that this was a plant-wide initiative by our senior leadership team to say, hey, this needs to get done. But once we got everybody on board, we've been able to develop and push through. So we now have completed the first portion of it, and we have the system in place and is running, and we're very happy with it. But of course, as quickly as we got the system up, everybody started coming up with new ideas. And so now we're into phase 2, and we're continuing on to expand the project and add more features to it that everybody in their wildest dreams had never thought of before. So.
Yeah, that's typically how it goes. Is once you see something, then you can imagine what comes next. But until you see it, right? So, yeah, very good. Brent, how about from your side when you guys were assessing the different trade-offs between build versus buy? What kind of factors did you guys account for?
Right. So we were looking for those quick wins. We were really, as the saying goes, behind the 8 ball in Industry 4.0. We were doing a lot of processes, semi-automated, if not manual. Data collection was manual, writing it on a piece of paper. We just didn't have the information that we felt we needed at some point. So we needed those quick wins, right? You and Dave talked about it in the interim session there. What's a quick win? We needed that, and we needed to have. I would add to Michael's comments by saying we needed a partner, because as I mentioned in my previous response, we didn't have the resources. We still don't have the resources to address a lot of those 34 projects in our funnel that I mentioned. So we needed a partner that could spin up with us quickly, identify a project that both us, we knew the project very well inside and out, and most of them we do, but we also needed a partner that could come in and say, we understand what you're trying to do. And we didn't go back and forth in 10, 20 meetings across 3 or 4 weeks trying to figure out what the process is. We were looking for a partner that said, we understand what you're trying to do. They had that experience. The partner had that experience behind them to say, we've seen this before. Here's how we can solve it for you. And really work with us hand in hand, if I can say it that way, to get to the dicing OEE example. That project was a prime example as far as how do we tackle a project. So that was one part, to answer your question more specifically, that was really critical for us. We needed a partner. We didn't need a vendor per se. No offense, Sean, but I think you see where I'm headed. We needed that partner because we didn't have a resource to be that person or entity to help us with these projects. But back to my other point, the dicing OEE project that I've been mentioning all along here, we had a unique situation where we had to grab those log files. They were actually Access databases Access 97 databases to be specific. We actually pulled in Dave, and we looked at the whole project. Obviously, we boiled it down to how do we get the data, and he said, oh boy, it's an Access 97 database. How do we get the data out of it? And long story short, we figured it out. But that's, I think, a critical part in the buy process, right? When you're looking for a vendor, do they know what you're trying to do? Give them an example. Do they understand everything? And they're not just shaking their head yes. You know, a lot of vendors can come back to you and say, yep, we get it. And when you actually put them to the task, it's like, oh, wait a minute. No, you don't quite get it. So yeah, I think that's absolutely critical when you're looking for a partner versus a vendor kind of thing to get these projects moving. And how much technical knowledge do they have? How much experience? And can we get those quick wins?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how this all comes back even from the previous sessions with the use cases, how there's a big human factor in all of this, right? It's not just the technology, it's the people around it that can and will make that difference. Sean, anything you want to add to this from the Tulip perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think both of those points, Brent and Michael, make a ton of sense, and sort of the IT/OT alignment, finding quick wins, and making sure that your technology partner is a partner. All that stuff, I think, makes a ton of sense. I would only just add, in addition to that, kind of identifying a roadmap and knowing what your priorities are and sort of where your low-hanging fruit are that will deliver value first, and then also, after you have those captured, what's next? I think maybe it was Michael you'd mentioned, or maybe I can't remember, one of you mentioned just sort of the scope creep that can happen. You have this new shiny thing, and then everybody wants to say, oh, well, look, we use this here, we can use this over here. And sure, ideally, yeah, you use it everywhere, but you have to figure out what's the first few steps that you're going to take. And after you take those, what are the next ones that are going to deliver incremental value? And then, right, having a vendor, a partner, a technology partner who is there with you to help you kind of build that team and build those solutions to the right priorities.
Yeah, very good, Sean. I think that kind of leads me to the next question too, is around like the total cost of ownership. And Michael, I'm going to go back to you for a minute. So when you choose the technology, and like in your case, it's kind of a hybrid, you get the plumbing, and then you guys are going to build on top of that. But afterwards, you've got a couple of things to factor in. One is how much of that work is your team going to do, because that's the opportunity cost that you may have to look at. Because if your IT team or your controls team is building things, that means they're not doing stuff on the shop floor. And then once it's all done, somebody has to make sure that the software is working, is supported, any other changes, any fixes, and questions from different users. So how do you balance that cost of ownership and make a decision on should your team be doing this, or should you outsource it, or should you hire new people who are specific to that platform?
In our particular case, there was never a decision in our mind that we wouldn't take ownership of the system eventually. We are still we didn't have enough resources in-house to achieve that goal, however. So we have been going out and we've been hiring additional staff that will be definitely doing more and more as we continue to utilize the system. The first phase of our system is what we're calling it, which has been running. It's only been running now for a few months. So we still are heavily dependent upon Litmus for support as we're continuing on. But our eventual goal is to migrate away. So like as we're making changes to the system, that we will take more and more ownership as we're bringing on additional staff to be able to support it. That is definitely a thought from our perspective as to the costs, but we facet the individuals who are doing it. So the people that are being involved with this system will also have other tasks throughout their throughout their day. It's not going to be all just babysitting the system and making sure that it's running, operating correctly. We've got other activities that they will be directly involved with, from project management to whatever the case may be. So I get where you're coming from, but it really was not from our perspective, it wasn't much of an issue. I think some of the bigger costs were just the initial development, which was modifying our existing plant OT network. And then once we had the infrastructure in place to be able to support, like, your edge servers, in this case, that are attaching to all of our equipment centers, once that was in place and the framework's been built, which was during the initial costs of the implementing the project. Now, as we go on and we're adding additional equipment centers and additional points for the system, there is very little additional costs now that we've got the main framework in place. So,
okay, that makes sense. So really, in your eyes, the goal was always to own the outcome of the support down the road, making sure your team was trained up, so you would not kind of outsource the day-to-day. The goal has always been to kind of own it yourself.
That is our end goal. I see that as depending upon how we're able to bring on additional staff and support, I see that we will, still rely upon Litmus for the near future going forward with, day-to-day issues, if any bugs or as things come up. But in the end, we will want to have ownership of the day-to-day operation, with then utilizing Litmus for support for any major project upgrades or improvements as we expand the system to not only the main manufacturing facility, but we are looking at future manufacturing facilities and implementing the similar types of systems that we will partner with Litmus and continue to utilize your system going forward. So,
very good, thank you, Brent. Any thoughts from your side on how your team evaluated the cost of ownership?
Yeah, I hate to put it simply, but I'm going to, because it was cost of ownership, and the Litmus license really for us was a no-brainer. The cost of that license versus, Michael hit on all the key points nicely, versus utilizing our own resources. We constantly have new products coming through our system, if you will, from R&D. The same person that knows that test software and we would be able to utilize to do all the integration I talked about is the same person that works with the new product teams out of R&D to create new test processes. Well, he's only one person. So we actually resorted right now, unfortunately, we're not hiring anyone at the moment in particular roles, although I would love to have someone for my as a secondary to myself. By title, I'm a data engineer for this particular Philips factory. I'd love to have a mini-me, if you want to call them that, that could understand what we've already done with the Litmus device. And to that point, and expanding, as Dave mentioned in the intern session, expanding to other facilities. We do have other Philips facilities that can utilize, as simple as it may be, the temperature and humidity, the environmental project that we worked on, but they don't have the resources to do it. They probably do have the money to be able to implement it. So really the cost factor was a no-brainer for us. We either utilize internal resources or we purchase a license that basically out of the box gets us what we need to get started, gets us the quick win. Our plant manager, and there's a little friendly competition going on amongst the Philips factories. Our plant manager's like, we have to be in the lead. How do we do it? That's on you guys. And he pointed the finger at myself and my manager.
Right.
How do we do it? And
right.
We started looking and said, this is the most cost effective. It's a no-brainer. Buy the license or utilize 2 or 3 resources to do the same tasks.
Yeah, very good. And from a long-term support, the goal then sounds like to keep that knowledge in-house, grow that knowledge project to project as well, or is there there's a support aspect as well, right? Where you could outsource the support or keep it in-house. Some customers see keeping it in-house as a very strong competitive advantage, because that drives the knowledge deeper within their own teams rather than kind of outsourcing the technology. Do you guys see that at all as well?
So if I may chime in there, because that was a part of your question I didn't answer, so I'm glad you mentioned it. I would say we would go along the lines of what Michael had mentioned. We would take ownership of the individual projects, the individual the temperature and humidity sensors, and gain the knowledge of how does that mechanism work and what do we need to know. One thing we're absolutely mindful of is production outages. So as we expand use of the Litmus device and do a closed loop system, and again, back to the temperature and humidity example, I hate to keep using it, but it fits nicely. Mm-hmm. When we do tie in those secondary humidifiers, as I mentioned in the other session, for those of you just joining though, right now it's an open loop system. We basically let a human know that the humidity dropped too low. Maintenance team turns on the secondary humidifiers to bring the humidity back up. We do have an effort going on to tie that into a closed loop system where the Litmus device notifies those secondary humidifiers, you need to turn on now. We really can't, if we find that humidity drops too low and that closed loop system stops working, we have 3 shifts across right now 5 days, but sometimes 6 days a week. We can't afford to have any of our operations to be down for any great length of time, given the volume of products we're putting through our facility. So having that inherent knowledge just for those specific projects, I think we'll tackle that, and in the future probably hire that mini-me person. Right. But to Michael's point, we'll definitely keep leaning on Litmus for continued technical support of their system.
Okay. Yeah, very good. I think that makes sense too. Is again, in my experience, where our customers can kind of get the foundational things in place from an infrastructure, from a plumbing perspective, and then start to develop their own knowledge on a platform where they bring their experience, but they bring the uniqueness of the environment that may not be as noticeable to an outside supplier. That's where you can really drive a very highly competitive advantage with a platform. So it's a hybrid model that I think really has a lot of value for you. Sean, from a tulip perspective, how do you see this kind of laying out?
Yeah, I think the one thing I can add here is that you'd be surprised at how often a company goes into a huge investment in a huge RFP, and they spend all this time and effort and money on some big platform, and then they don't get the value out of it that they expect because adoption is low. They're not circulating it. They didn't socialize it. They didn't get buy-in. And so when you're talking about total cost of ownership, the other half of that equation is it delivering the value and the return that you expected it to deliver, that you justified when you were kind of going about and making your decisions. And I think a lot of that comes down to during the implementation period, you want to get your quick wins, but you also want to make sure that you're building a center of excellence and bringing in advocates and users and folks who are going to, be gung-ho about using the tool. And also that plays into some of the continuity points that you guys were making, where, if you're moving to a different facility or people come and go, or you're onboarding new folks, you want a whole ecosystem of people who are using this thing and able to find value from it. Because often these projects fail just because, you didn't get enough buy-in from your people, and ultimately they're the ones who are going to be benefiting from it and using it the most.
Yeah. So how have you seen, there's two sides to this coin, like you said, where a company will do the big RFP, they'll buy the systems, and it kind of flops. There's also the side where they do that and it works. What have you seen? What characteristics or traits of the companies that succeeded what would you say they've done well or better than the ones who have not succeeded? Because I think you're spot on. There's a lot of failures that you don't hear about.
Yeah, I think that typically what happens for the ones that fail, and maybe fail is kind of a strong word, but for the ones where it doesn't go as they've expected, it takes longer,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it starts with setting the right expectations. So when they're bringing this tool on board, and in Tulip's case, we want them to be a partner. We want them to be engaged in the platform. It's not an off-the-shelf thing. It's something that they're going to use to sort of build solutions. And so we need to set the right expectation that we're not going to just deliver you like a gift wrapped package of everything that you need. It's a collaborative process, and we're going to work together to build, especially early on, those first use cases that are going to deliver value. And so if they're going into the project knowing that, okay, we're both going to work on this, we need to have some champions lined up who are going to learn it and they're going to build it and we're going to get buy-in, that's great. And also, I think for the ones where it does go well, it's a focus on those first wins. It's starting small and expanding to your next obvious use cases, not trying to do like 100 things at once and just push it out to all of wherever you see a problem and try to plug those holes right away. It's like really focusing on your big issues first and then replicating your successes in like your next use cases.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a common theme I keep hearing from this panel for sure, but I think we've seen that with our customers as well, is when they focus on one specific problem or one specific use case and they nail it, it gives them something to build on and it generates enthusiasm. And it makes people realize that, yes, there is a better way. Whereas if you do way too much all at the same time, it's tough and you're not getting anything done. So it's that time to value is so important to keep the momentum going. So back to you, Michael. So on this theme of time to value, and its importance in your experience in your past and even with Tyranny nowadays, what do you do for strategies to kind of expedite the time to value? Like how do you marshal the troops? How do you get people lined up? How do you identify the prerequisites that need to be solved before you start, so that you're not solving these niggling issues as you go?
Sorry, my button wasn't working to turn the mic on. Anyway, I think the biggest thing for the project as a whole, from our analysis of it, and what helps is having a clear understanding of the scope of the project from the front end. I think that is the biggest killer that I've noticed, even through the development of our projects, is the fact that, coming up with the initial scope of the project, making sure we have a clear plan for the implementation. Who knows whether or not that the schedule, obviously unforeseen factors do play into that. But I think the biggest thing was keeping a focus on our project, and then trying to mitigate any scope creep that was going to cause cause delays in our project. One of the things that we unfortunately did a little poorly was just making sure all of the necessary supporting staff was on board through the scope of the project. We thought we had everybody, but it turned out that the needs of the project had additional resources that we weren't quite planning on. So we had to pivot in our own particular application and implementation of the project. But I'd say that was our biggest thing, is simply just keeping the scope. And then as things came up, instead of trying to add them necessarily to the project that we were doing at that time, start making plans for a secondary project or a third project to implement them in phases, versus trying to change the focus of what we were doing, get the initial framework done, and get a system in place that took care of our initial asks, And then as we grow in the future, we start rolling into it additional capabilities without continuing to lengthen the project by trying to put everybody's new asks and requests and everything into the system, in that initial project. Otherwise, we would still be having a system that wouldn't be providing any data and would be still in development without showing any progress to the management who are asking for for at least the initial data. We'd still be working and no one would be happy. So.
Yeah, very good points. So when you picked that initial scope, did that scope come from your management, or was it a consortium of people who realized that things needed to change, or was it from the bottom up, or was it? And the second part of that question is the scope you picked, was that, would you consider that was the right choice? I'm kind of put you on the spot, right? Was it the right first project to pick? Just your thoughts on that.
Well, I would say when we first went into it, you can use the phrase, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So, the first time we went in, we had the ask. The ask was, provide us OEE for our production lines. Provide us a plant OEE number. That was the general statement from our management as to, we know that our plant isn't operating as efficiently as it needs to be, that we have too many new sales and too much demand coming in, that we now need to be more efficient, and we need to be able to determine where are our failure points with inside the line, which equipment centers are not running at the efficiencies that they needed to be running at to be able to maintain or to meet our target OEE numbers. And so we went into it with a general understanding of, hey, what we want to achieve from the first phase, or at least for the project. But I think once we got into it, our project group, and we started looking with different vendors and different opportunities for our system, and then we selected Litmus as our partner. You guys were able to come in and kind of bring better focus to us for what really made sense as a scope. Yes, we achieved the ask from our management, which was a very vague statement, but then we were able to better focus on what made sense for the first phase. And then once we started doing these tasks and figuring out, okay, this is what it's going to take to get our individual efficiencies from all of our different equipment centers on the floor. This is what it's going to take to get, information back in, so we can start generating reports that can be kicked out to all the senior leadership team, and they'd be very happy because they're getting their daily report showing all the information of what's happening on the plant floor. Once we did that, then of course the scope creep crept in. People were like, oh, well, hey, can we shift this from a daily information to shift-based information? Can we add in additional equipment centers that we didn't include in the initial part of the scope? And I basically at that point said, no, I have to keep the focus on what we originally agreed to with the original scope and the workshops that were developed with Litmus, to be able to make sure that we stayed focused on those tasks without deviating from all these niceties or additional asks by all of the middle management and the other people that are now seeing some of the screens, and they're like, ooh, wow, can we do this? And so I think that was that was our big focus. And now that we're moving on and we're addressing some of those asks and making improvements to the system, everybody is very happy with what we're seeing. And I think a lot of that is we have focused on getting the buy-in of not just the management who asked for it, but the people on the floor who are entering any of the additional information. Like we particularly, we have a very self-determining system. So all of our PLCs in our equipment centers, anytime we get an alarm, it kicks back information to us. Tells us why the equipment center went down. So we're able to, monitor what's going on. But anytime something comes back and the system goes down and we don't know why, well, the plant floor people have to be able to go in and, select the cause for the downtime and have to be involved and have the buy-in. Otherwise, we have all this time that's not going to be, we have all this the downtime that's not going to be designated, and we've got holes in our data. So having a complete company buy-in has been very helpful for us. So
yeah, very good, very good. I think the key to that, you're right. Narrow scope, stay focused on it, and say yes, but not yet a lot. Just so that they can see and do later. But you have to finish the first scope first. I totally agree. Brent, from your side, how did you guys choose? Like, obviously, you guys have a lot of interesting things going on in the shop floor. How do you pick that first project, and did you have time to value or speed to value top of mind on that?
So we picked the first project, the OEE application with our dicing saws. That was our first project with the Litmus device. Was it the most expedient relative to the temperature and humidity? No. However, our normal process is, well, being new to, let me say it this way, being new to the digital factory industry 4.0 realm, if I can call it that, we didn't have a process. And to some degree, we still don't, except to say that we get all of these ideas coming in. Once we get a project in the queue and completed, in this case, the OEE application, the OEE project, it's the old saying, if you build it, they will come. And so we had these other engineers that they saw this OEE project come to fruition. It took us several months. There were many moving pieces, to put it simply. But we eventually got there, and we eventually got buy-in and the wow factor from these other engineers, and more importantly from management. Because part of our process is not only do we collect ideas from our users and our engineers and put them into what I call the factory funnel, excuse me. As we pick those projects out of that funnel, we actually have to create a business case for each one. And we present that in what's called our PDCA. So that's Plan, Do, Check, Act. I'm sure many of you and many of the viewers understand Plan, Do, Check, Act. And so we sit down with the whole site management team. We give them a presentation. Here's what we want to do next. Here's why. Here's what the costs are involved. Here's some of the preliminary steps, at least to get them, into, or get them to buy in. Hey, this doesn't look so bad, kind of thing. And here's some preliminary steps. And yeah, we think this looks pretty good. So while we take all the ideas from our engineers, users, like I said, we do have to go to management and say, can we spend the money on this project now or that project now? And, I would say for the OEE project, it wasn't the quick win. However, it did get noticed, as opposed to the temperature and humidity project. And yes, I keep going back and forth to those, but those are really good examples of answering your question. That project came out of what we call a daily management meeting. So our management team meets every morning at 8:30 on our mezzanine level, and they go around the room and say, what's your problems or issues for today? What's the bottlenecks in production? What happened the previous day or two? And sure enough, somebody mentioned, hey, we're seeing a lot of failures at 4 or 5 steps down from that gluing operation where the humidity comes into play, and the glue doesn't cure properly. And somebody said, oh, wait a minute. So you're saying we're losing 80, 90% of our product because that glue's not curing. Well, that's the idea. And the plant managers in those meetings, he says, you, and you, I want more information, go investigate it. And in that case, it was fairly quick to come back and say the glue's not curing right. We already had a system in place from our maintenance team that collected humidity levels. It wasn't finite enough. It would collect numbers every 6-8 hours, whatever the increment was. And they couldn't really, it was an old system. They couldn't adapt it. So my manager and I said, let's look at doing something better. And sure enough, it only took me, I don't know, maybe a couple of days, and actually some input from Litmus. I actually queried them and said, what are the best devices to use? Here's my use case. What's the suggestion? and I got good feedback, and that's what we went with. I won't mention the names. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but
yeah,
yeah. We took the advice from Litmus and moved forward. That was our quick win, and that actually got attention because within about a month, due to acquiring the actual sensors, that took a little bit of time. We started this right in the middle of the supply chain, really worldwide supply chain issues, so we couldn't get the sensors right away.
right.
That's what took us so long. But eventually we did get them. We got them in place fairly quickly. It only took me probably a day and a half because I don't know Modbus, admittedly, or didn't know Modbus. So that's what took so long.
Okay.
Otherwise, I keep adding sensor. Yeah, I add sensors now. I can add a sensor in 5 minutes, and get it integrated into the existing network and existing Grafana graphs. And so, back to your point of your question, we do have to get management involved to filter that funnel that we already have and present that business case to that management team, and they can say, yep, it's good enough. We're okay with the cost and we're okay with the scope. We're obviously critical. Go for it.
Very good. Okay, interesting. Sean, we're moving towards the end of the session, but I did want to get your perspective from Tulip as well. Like, when you guys are engaged, how do you work with the customers to select use cases, or what are you seeing from your customers when they can kind of choose the use cases? Are they broad and deep, or are they very narrow and focused, or how's that look from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think we try to get to narrow, focused use cases that have real impacts, like on the shop floor, that operators that reflect issues that operators are having, that can be solved right away, so that we can then start building for the next thing. And I think when we talk about time to value, a lot of times, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you're buying some big giant software platform, it kind of becomes a black box. Implementation takes forever, and you don't actually get to see the fruits of that work until it's all done at the end. And then now a year has passed and you've got nothing to show for it. Where it should be more like a blank slate, where you are building for your highest value use cases, a couple that you can choose right off the bat. And then as soon as you've got those in place, you can take what you've learned and replicate it across the rest of your, whatever else you want to extend that to. And so, yeah, we work with customers right off the bat to identify champions and sort of target those high value use cases that are also going to be low hanging fruit, that are maybe a little easier to solve than like the most complex thing with, 100 different moving parts. We'll start simple, get value, prove it out right away. And then we can move on to more complex things once there's a little bit more, understanding and buy-in.
Yeah, very good. I think we often see a lot of those big projects as well, which take a couple of years, and they're great production systems. They're very locked down, and they're basically running the environment, but they inevitably kind of counter what we've been talking about here, is democratizing the data, because it's very locked up, it's very siloed, it's very collected for very specific purposes on the shop floor. So being able to, again, find those use cases that add value to more processes that are outside of that, or at least bringing the capability to individual users, because those are the people who are going to make best use of the data, because they know their processes as well. I think does also add to that speed to value, because they see it immediately, and it's very personal to them, which then builds that momentum. Okay, coming up to the end of the session here. Just any other further comments from Sean, yourself, or Brent, or Michael? You guys have been great. I mean, you guys have some great insights, some great experiences, and I really appreciate you guys sharing them.
Yeah, just briefly, Mark, I would say there's no way we could have even got our feet wet with Industry 4.0 initiatives had we not decided to just buy. It just comes back to, we would not have had the resources to do it by ourselves.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I see that too, where you get into the science experiment method right? And you just keep trying things, and because technology changes, there's always something new to try. So sometimes you have to just go with that, and move on. Sean and Michael, any other parting thoughts?
I tend to agree with Brent, is the fact that we spent the money and we bought the package system from Litmus, and I think that was a good way to go. But the fact that your system has been flexible enough to be able to meet our needs, and even from a growth standpoint, the interfaces such as like Brent was talking about, whether it be Modbus or some other communications protocol for attaching PLCs or equipment sensors, and the flexibility of it was really a selling point for us. I've got a variety. I think we added 20 equipment centers that each have slightly different PLCs in there. And so by being able to pull all of that data together from all of these different platforms really is that itself is just I can't speak more more highly of that capability, and that flexibility is really a good point for the system. So
very good, thank you. Shannon, any parting words? I see Dave's joined us too, so that's the sign.
Yeah, I see the cue here.
He's the Grim Reaper. He's here to end the session. So.
Yeah, I quickly will just say, obviously, I'm in favor of buying, but I think that one of the things that you also get with the right vendors is products are going to improve. The regulatory, the security and compliance is covered, and that sort of thing going forward. You don't have to worry about as much. But ideally, you're buying with a vendor who is a partner and that empowers your users and the manufacturers to actually be doers and creators, and not and actually have a say in how the thing turns out and how it works, and who uses it and where it goes. But it's been great chatting with everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been awesome. It's been a great session. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Michael, as well.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, great conversation, guys. Thank you. Yeah, one of the things, Mark, we were talking about. Oh, go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say, what were your thoughts about the session?
Yeah, I liked it. One of the questions was, we're doing. You'd mentioned the experimentation part of it, and we're going to talk about that in the next session with the tech stack. And I see that a lot, where they're experimenting with something, and they try it, and it works, and then they add another piece to it, and they add another piece to it, and what you end up with is a functioning system, but there's no way to really manage it, scale it, replicate it, and those kinds of things, or at least very difficult to do so.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, I see that a lot, right? Where it works in one plant, and then you try to move it to the next plant, and it's not going to work because you don't have the knowledge, for one. And there's so many different pieces that they may or may not work at the next site. And then if you want to make a change, well, it's difficult because you have to manually handcraft the change at each site. So
right.
It gets tedious.
Yeah, and I think somebody brought it up earlier with they like the flexibility of the system, which I think talks to the changes in technology. Now that, in OT, having something, you put a machine or a line in, you want that to run, forever, or 30 years, right? Yes. Where IT, their stuff is changing at a very rapid pace. It's 12 months, 18 month cycles that new things are coming out. So, and as we merge this, it's like, how do you adjust to that? So when the cloud company decide, hey, here's a new, better way to get data up here, how are you going to adjust that stack you put in together and adjust to that? And I think was referred to earlier is just that flexibility to be able to shift quickly. Right, you're not having to rewrite the whole thing. It's like, okay, we're going to go to this cloud vendor one day. It's not a big deal to shift to another cloud vendor if you needed to.
That's a great example. And also the more pieces you have in your tech stack, well, if one of them becomes out of date or one of them becomes incompatible with another piece in your tech stack, it's kind of a problem, right? So I think to minimize risk, condensing your tech stack is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think condensing and just having the flexibility built in, having that done from the get-go, I think is going to be helpful.
Yeah, so you can pivot, because that's an important theme that I'm seeing more and more and more is changes like very, very rapid now. So being able to pivot to what you want to do and enable the next thing, you don't want to limit yourself in that space at all. Right.
Yeah, and I think the IT group, they're so used to things changing quickly, and they're not used to having an OT size, space that are like, wait a minute, you just broke everything I built for the last 3 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, just change the port or something like that.
Yeah.
No, it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Well, you have to remember too that each plant has a maintenance team, and their job is to make things last forever.
Right, exactly.
So it's kind of it's
counterintuitive to each other.
Counterintuitive.
I
think that's it.
Right, but so I want to say that having the right stack and having the flexibility allows you to do that, and I think it ties into the build versus buy. Right, it's the same thing you're just talking about. Like I can go buy a bunch of pieces. Even if I go buy, but if I buy a bunch of pieces that work together, how do I scale and manage it? Like we were talking about.
How do you scale and manage it? That's the next question you have to well, it's the first question you should think about, not the next one, because by then it's too late.
Right.
Like,
right.
Shoot.
But I think that just evolved because of experimentation, right? There's no plan. It's just kind of one step at a time, and you keep adding to it. So
yes.
I think it all ties in together.
It's a valid point. Get one thing working, then move on to the next. And that's not a platform. That's individual components working together, which is great because you solved the problem. But then you should probably take a step back and say, how could I now solve the whole thing a little bit better?
Right. Exactly. So yeah, great conversation.
Yeah, it's good. Well, I'm looking forward to the next session because you've got some interesting people. I know you've got Dell and Tulip in there again, and area cybersecurity. So the cybersecurity piece would be interesting as well to see how that kind of wraps all into there.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we're working on a project and we spend more time getting firewall rules and security stuff taken care of than we do actually implementing the solution. So, I understand security is always important, but we gotta, we also have to work within the confines of that secure space, but still get the data to the right people in a timely manner.
Yeah, well, it's like what Michael said last session, right? It's making sure you really understand what needs to be done and getting all the right people aligned up front, and that's where your speed to value comes from. Planning is important. You can't just start and you go back to your tech stack. Planning is important, so I've created my own tech stack now, but is it actually secure? Is it actually, or is it kind of bespoke? I made it work. Let's go kind of thing, which is not right. My hands up.
Right. We've all been there.
Yeah, we've been there.
The security assessment is like, you did what?
You did what? How and why?
Well, I just routed through my home computer and it sent it to the cloud. Yeah, I've heard all sorts of stories.
I bought a router, and don't worry, I changed the default password. It's good.
Right. It's now password 1.
Yes. No one will crack it.
Right. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
Hey, Chris,
right.
How are you?
Hi, Chris.
I'm good. Thank you for kind of giving us a nice segue into this next session.
Yes, that's our job.
Well, I'm excited for this one. I'm excited for our panelists who are filing in now. I'll save my introduction for last year. I want to focus on the smart folks that we have covering this next topic, which is around the manufacturing tech stack. And